I'm Haze Hartwig. This is Bamboo, Vancouver's property management and investment podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Today, we have Peter back on the show to discuss about the stats and what's going on in the Vancouver market. It has definitely been under a bit of flux. Peter, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Haze. Always happy to sit down and chat about the rental market and how landlords can utilize this information to get their places rented.
Absolutely. So I guess we'll just get right into it. I mean, this month, one-bedroom units again climbed for the third time since March this year. Just by $12, of course, but this does add up over and over and over. So the average cost right now for a one bedroom in Greater Vancouver is $23.30, which is it's getting hard out there. And Vancouver proper sits with an average rent of $4.02 per square foot, where the average in the rest of the region is at 3.06. So it's like over at $1.
It's high
to be downtown Vancouver, which is nuts. And then another things, we'll be touching in on all of these later on through the show, of course, but the three-bedroom units across Metro Vancouver has all increased. My logic on this, I feel, is that there's not very many of them.
Yeah, you don't see too many three-bedroom units, and whenever you do come across them, they're usually pretty expensive.
Well, exactly right. I mean, and then you're talking about the houses. We'll get into all that later on, but I mean, it's pretty heavy. Interestingly enough, there was another rate hike again in June 7th, as it just keeps on going up for the variable mortgages. They're also talking about increasing the fixed ones as well. So again, this is going to put more pressure on owners, which means the cost of borrowing is more, and that will transfer obviously into the tenants for higher rents. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think I'm talking out my ass here?
I definitely agree that that does happen frequently when owners they find themselves being squeezed a little bit by the mortgage prices by the interest rates, and then they do kind of translate that into higher rent. But those things aren't necessarily always related. Just because they put the rent higher doesn't mean somebody will rent it.
Yeah.
Now, as we go into the summer season, things are heating up and the market heats up just like the weather. And that we see this pretty much every year. When it's nice and bright outside, people are more interested in moving. They want to rent. In the winter, when it's cold and gray and gets dark at 4:30, nobody wants to think about moving all their stuff to a new apartment. So we definitely see a lot more supply on the market. We definitely see a lot more people moving and a lot more tenants interested in moving, which obviously drives the prices up as there's just more market activity. But definitely have seen prices increase and have seen some landlords, putting the prices for their rentals extremely high just due to the fact that they have rising costs as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then for those that are trying to figure out why we're using the one bedroom unfurnished as our baseline, it's simply for the fact that obviously a two bedroom is going to be more, three bedroom is going to be more, furnished will be usually higher than unfurnished, and so on and so forth. So that's why we use that as a baseline. And now at the top of the show, we mentioned that the average for Greater Vancouver is $23.30. This is $274 higher than it was last year for a one bed. So the trend is violently going up. It's kind of nuts. And now this is where some people claim that they'd like to see rent control, the changing, not being able to raise the rent between tenants, since it pushes up the market, of course. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think rent control is a good idea or no?
I totally see both sides of the argument. Obviously, I'm coming from a biased position because my job relies on the rent. But at the same time, I'm a renter myself, and it is nice not, if I stay in a place that the rent can only be increased by a certain amount. But if I was to look for a new place, I currently pay $2,400 for a two bedroom, which is in North Vancouver, which is well below market. If I moved, I could probably re-rent my place for $28,000 or $3,000 or maybe even $32,000 if I got lucky. So, looking for a new rental for myself personally, that would be quite difficult. And I totally understand both sides of it. Vancouver does have a little bit of rent control in the sense that, when each year there's a cap on how much can be increased, but in between tenancies, it can be increased by whatever the market will bear.
Yeah.
I usually will, under the instruction from my owners, will usually increase the rent by about 10 or 15% in between tenancies.
Yeah.
That's usually, year after a year or so.
Okay.
That seems like 10% or 12%, maybe 15% year over year seems to kind of be the market trend. And unfortunately, that's kind of just the reality of the number of people that are looking for housing in Vancouver.
Yeah. I mean, one of the drawbacks to rent control that people seem to overlook is that there's no incentive to upgrade anything at that point in time. So, I mean, yes, it's good at the get-go, but this is sort of where you end up in that sort of rundown project type of home, where they just put in a stove that may or may not work properly because there's no incentive to upgrade anything. And so that's sort of the drawback to the rent control. Like, yes, on the nose, it seems like a good idea, but gradually over time, you're probably going to end up with places that are starting to get run down because there's no incentive to put anything high quality into it, because you're going to get the exact same as you are, as well as it kind of messes up with the mom and pops type of owners, simply in the sense that, a big company that has a full rental building, them I can understand being rent controlled. Like I get that, but for the mom and pops owners, that's just, another person who's working in Vancouver who bought an investment property. It's a pretty heavy hit on them if it's straight rent control, because they have no way to eventually cover the nut later on. So it sort of has a double-sided sword.
Totally. I've definitely seen that. I've had some of my clients call me up and say, hey, my costs have increased so much. And
I get a lot of those too.
And it's hard. It can be hard for some people to bear. I know everybody thinks that landlords are these horrible people, but the majority of my clients, they used to own a one bedroom that they lived in. They moved into something larger, and then they wanted to keep the one bedroom and they rent it out. Most of the owners that I work with, they don't own 20 properties, and they're not jacking up the price whenever they get an opportunity to. I've even got some owners who don't want to do rent increases year over year, just because they like the tenants and they want to encourage them to stay longer. So I do totally understand that the rents are increasing at a pretty rapid rate. I'm sure some of that is from people wanting to make more money, but there is definitely an aspect of it, of real costs increasing, not just in the interest rates, but in maintenance and any renovations to the property. Same thing. Those costs are all increasing pretty rapidly as well. So those are all real costs that owners do need to bear at some point. And of course, they're going to pass down some to the tenant, but it's not always going to cover it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and some landlords, I agree, don't raise the rent every year. I'm one of them personally, simply for the fact that having a tenant there and not having a vacancy is more important, as opposed to, trying to get that extra, $100 a month or whatever. If I have a chance to have no vacancy over trying to get $100 and possibly risking, 2 months of vacancy, like it's going to take a long time to get that money back. So a lot of landlords that do kind of think about that way, about, always wanting to get that tip top rent, maybe making a faux pas, not only for a tenant, but also just on a financial level. Like, zero rent means you're paying a mortgage.
Totally. I always say that a vacancy can be the worst possible thing, unless there's a really good reason for it. But if you're just having a vacancy because you're too stubborn to reduce the rent by $100 in between tenancies or something like that,
exactly right.
It makes way more sense to have somebody in there paying stable rent and build a bit of a relationship with the tenant, because they're going to treat your property correctly and treat it with care and respect. Whereas if you've got a new person coming in every year and you're absolutely gouging them out the eyeballs, then maybe they're not going to be as cooperative and a good tenant as possible. So there's definitely two sides to it. I totally understand. And I obviously hate to say, I'm just going to play the middle and not pick a side, but I do definitely understand kind of the both sides of the coin.
Yeah, absolutely. So as speaking with rent increases and that, Burnaby and Coquitlam saw the largest increases this month, likely due to the new builds getting their occupation. New build come out, everybody jumps on the market, usually higher prices and so on and so forth. As we said at the top of the show, the average square foot for Greater Vancouver is $3.06, with the top three being Vancouver at $4.02, New West being at $3.42, and Burnaby at $3.23. Now, with the pricing per square foot, what do you think about that as far as how does that apply to units? Because, I mean, obviously, we're not just going to walk in and be like, oh, it's 4.02 per square foot. Your unit is 800 square feet. This is the price. So, like, how do you work with your pricing and decide, like, how to price it, basically? What are you sending to the factors?
Honestly, for me personally, if I was looking for a rental for myself, I don't look at the price per square foot at all.
Yeah.
It's just not something that I do. When I go on look for a rental for myself, I go on Craigslist, I set my maximum budget, and I set the number of bedrooms I'm looking for, and look around on the map view the area that I'm interested in living.
Yeah.
And I do it based on comparables. If I see a unit that looks nice and it's X amount of dollars, and then I see a unit that I'd prefer to live in and looks nicer and it's cheaper or more expensive or whatever, then I'd base my decisions based on that. So I do it the same way, working the other way around to look at the price. You do a price analysis of all the units, similar comparable units in the area, not based on square foot or price per square foot, but based on maybe the square footage and the price, but not necessarily combined.
Yeah, I got
you. It's just there's different ways to do it. I'm sure some people look at the price per square foot, but just personally as a tenant on the other side looking, it's not a metric that I would look at.
Yeah.
Of course, if you see a unit that's 750 square feet and it's X amount of dollars, and then you see another unit that's 1,000 square feet and they're pretty comparable, you're going to go with the bigger unit. Of course, everybody wants more space, but in general, a lot of units are relatively similar sized based on the number of bedrooms that they are, and you're really just looking at kind of comparable units and maybe amenities in the building, and location is a really big one as well. So I'd say price per square footage is definitely interesting to look at from a kind of high level perspective to see the large price increases. But on a smaller perspective, as an individual landlord, looking at the price per square foot, I don't necessarily think is super important. Realistically, you just want to make sure that you're getting a solid amount of rent for your property, and that you're, like we talked about in the last couple minutes, making sure that you've got a solid tenant in there for a stable period of time.
Yeah, it's funny because like working on both sides, like with the doing the sales side as well as the rental side, I have to have this conversation with so many landlords because a lot of them are coming straight from a sales side and not realizing that the tenant mindset is slightly different from the purchaser's mindset, in the sense that a tenant generally is looking for function first and then coming through. Like, they need a 2-bedroom. So they're going to look at all the 2 bedrooms, and that's level one. Whereas a buying person generally will be looking at a bunch of other factors, such as upgrades and the quality upgrades and all these sort of things. And interesting enough, the price per square foot on the sale side is actually, in most cases, useless. And yeah, I said that. I'm sure there's going to be a few realtors that are, what are you talking about? But generally speaking, unless it's in the same building with all the same stuff, like price per square foot at that point in time, it might be useful there, but otherwise not really that effective a way to price a place. So it works the same way in the rental side. But it's just interesting that between the purchasers and the tenants, there's 2 different type of mindset that they have when searching for a place. Even coming down to this, sometimes you'll talk to a landlord and they'll say like, oh, well, our unit is on a higher floor. A tenant doesn't care. They need a 2-bedroom, whether it's on the 9th floor or the 19th. I mean, if they're comparable price, maybe that would be a factor, but it's definitely not in the top 3. I don't think most people are pricing, $3,000 per square foot or $3,000 per floor up in sales or whatever.
I totally agree. I think it also comes down to that the rent amounts are obviously a much smaller number than purchasing amounts. So there's less wiggle room with a purchasing amount. You can drop $10,000 or $20,000 or $30,000 off the price if it's on a lower floor. Yeah. Obviously, you're not going to be able to drop that much off the price if it's on a lower floor from $2,600 to $2,550, right? So I totally agree. In new builds especially, we see this all the time when the units are super, super comparable, as in they're identical floor plans on different floors.
Yeah.
And realistically, does the tenant care if it's on the 9th or the 19th floor? Maybe a little bit, a tiny little bit if the view is so much better on the 19th floor. But realistically, those little differences aren't going to shift the price that much.
No.
So it's definitely, like you said, it's a different mindset between somebody who's purchasing or selling a home and somebody who's just interested in renting it. Yeah. The decision-making process is much different. And it's, I don't want to say it's more surface level for renters, but they, like you said, it's more function over form. They're mostly looking for a place to put their bed and a place to maybe put their home office or desk or something like that. It's a lot less kind of all these little tiny details that are going to increase the price by a huge amount. So that's definitely something that landlords should take into account.
Yeah, and speaking of account, we touched base on sales and tenants and all this sort of thing. I've run into a couple places lately on the condo side that don't have parking and have found that it is very difficult. So do you find the same thing? Like if a person is about to invest in a place and they're thinking whether to get parking and or storage, do you think that makes a big difference, or do you think it's based on city, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think it makes a huge difference, honestly. Almost all of my friends have cars. Most people I know own a car. Unless you live downtown and you work downtown, I mean, even then, lots of people have cars, right? So the reason why people move to Vancouver is to go camping and go to the mountains and go skiing and stuff like that. And you kind of need a car to do all those things. So exactly. Most people I know have a car. Most people I know want a parking spot and don't want to have to move their car every 2 hours to park on the street. So 100%. I think parking is super essential. For the most part, usually just bake it into the price of the rental. Yeah. Don't, be charging extra for the spot and stuff like that. The rent is $26 without parking, but if you want parking, an extra $200. But they kind of advertise that halfway down the advertisement. To me, if parking's included in the price, you can always raise the price to adjust for that. And if somebody wants to take it, they'll take it. Mm-hmm. There's definitely some buildings in downtown where people are less car reliant, or maybe they're not as sensitive to needing a car or needing a parking spot. But in general, all of the listings that I have or have had that don't have parking spots have definitely suffered in some capacity from not having a parking spot.
Yeah, I also find the same thing with the storage now. And it didn't used to be as big of a deal, but the newer units that they have now are so small. There's no storage in the unit. So I find that places that don't have a storage locker outside of the unit, especially the one-bedroom ones, is really difficult because people have, as you said, skiing and camping and whatnot. Like, you don't want to have a Christmas tree inside your, 600 square foot one-bedroom year-round. You want to put that somewhere. So I think that people need to also consider when they're purchasing, get one with storage, especially if it's a one-bedroom. So I guess that'd be more of a tip for the investors, that if you're looking at a new build or whatever you are looking at, do narrow it down for your purchase to find one that does have parking and storage, because it will make your life easier both for your tenants as well as rentability, as well as when you go to sell it down the road, because as you just touched on, people have cars, right?
I totally agree with the storage aspect as well. Mm-hmm. We've obviously seen that newer builds are smaller. Those nice old buildings in the West End are huge, and they don't really exist anymore. The newer builds are getting smaller and smaller, or at least more efficient.
Yeah, air quote efficient.
So 100% storage outside of the unit is super important, especially for a studio or a one bed. Not as important if you've got a 2-bed or a 3-bed that maybe has an additional storage in the unit. Yeah. But these days with work from home, a lot of people are converting those tiny little dens without windows. They're converting those places into, a place to put a desk, especially if it's a couple or something like that, and they're both working from home and they need a little bit of separation while they're working. Then having that extra space to not full of your Christmas tree and can be used for something else is definitely important. So I totally agree with you there.
Yeah, absolutely. So the apartments take up 77% of the available listings, and townhomes and houses both are around 5% each for how much of the market share they take up. Now, this makes sense because a bigger product is generally more expensive with a higher borrowing rate and less attractive towards cash flow. Most people can't buy the $1 million plus house and rent it to cover the nut, i.e. pay for the mortgage and so on and so forth. The logic would be to buy in at a lower one bedroom condo, whatever it may be, and work towards cash flow. Now, have you seen anybody who's brand new purchased a place? Are they cash flowing, or as far as any of the newer landlords that you've picked up?
For newer builds, now, I don't usually necessarily ask, how much is your mortgage, how much are your costs and stuff like that. But you can usually get a good sense by kind of the price that they're looking for. I do find a lot with these new builds that people want to absolutely maximize the price, and I'm assuming because they've got relatively significant carrying costs. Their mortgage is high, their property tax, the strata fees or the maintenance fees these days are pretty high, especially in a lot of newer builds that have all these really nice amenities. Yeah. You pay for those. It is a good way to attract a tenant with all these nice amenities, but conversely, you're going to be paying a higher maintenance fee if you've got 6 different gyms in the building on the various floors and a pool and a sauna and all that stuff. So I definitely think that these days, just the housing prices in general, people are probably not going to be able to cover all of their expenses with the rent. Yeah. And that's kind of just the way it is. At the same, on the other side, you're still getting a tenant to pay 75% of your costs and building equity in a home, and that's pretty good.
Oh, absolutely. And you can write off, the interest and all that stuff. So, it's still a good idea to invest in real estate, especially in Vancouver. It's not going anywhere. So, I guess basically buy in and ride it out as it gradually you will get back to cash flow eventually, usually within the 5 to 7 years type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you were talking about the kind of bigger houses and stuff like that, there are other opportunities to, split up houses into basement suites and laneway homes. I think laneway homes are honestly a pretty good
absolutely
kind of mortgage helper. It's off of, kind of still on your property, but it's, kind of separated a little bit. So you do get that nice separation. And honestly, I've rented out a couple laneway homes and people seem to love them way more than basement suites. Just being kind of above ground and kind of you're in your own little separate home. People definitely
not sharing a wall,
not sharing any walls is great for the homeowner as well as great for the tenants. So speaking to that, I think laneway homes are definitely a way that if you own maybe a detached home, you got a big backyard and you're not using the backyard, maybe the kids have moved out and nobody's playing in the backyard anymore, maybe consider putting a little laneway home on there because they're definitely very rentable.
Oh, absolutely. And especially with all the Vancouver specials, they're almost made begging for it, And we need more density. We need more properties to help alleviate the cost of living here. The cost is astronomical right now. And so, we need more places to rent is what it comes down to. That being said, with the active listings of those 77% of the market there, 37 are 1-bed, 48 are 2-bed, and 13% are 3-bed. So investors take note that 1-bed is a cheaper entry, more are needed, and it generally has a higher turnover. As you were talked about earlier in the show, actually, that, the 1-bed and then they moved on and that's how they have the investment property. It sort of seems to work the same way with the tenants. Have you noticed a higher turnover for 1-bedrooms as well, or?
Yeah, definitely. People in a 1-bed, they might be kind of hopping around neighborhoods to see which one they're interested in living. Also, generally, if you're going to kind of settle down into a 2-bed, you're going to, like I said, settle down more. So, and kind of, put your roots down. So I totally agree. 1-beds are definitely a good entry, but tenants can hop around. To be honest, I've found recently that I don't get noticed very often from many of my tenants. They've been staying for quite a while, which is great. I'm more than happy to have them stay. But at the same time, some owners get a little bit antsy when the tenant hasn't left in a while. And they go, oh, look, the market rent is so much higher right now. Yeah. And that's kind of just the, what happens when you rent out your property. Eventually the tenant will leave and you'll be able to bump up the rent by sometimes 30 or 40 or 50%.
Well, hell, we just covered about 200 and some odd from last year. So, you definitely can move up for sure, right?
Exactly.
So, it's interesting. I'm with you. I think that we have a lot of turnover on the 1-bedrooms as well, simply for the fact that people upgrade their life, I guess. You start off as a single dude and then your partner moves in, gets too small, or thinking about having kids or getting a dog or whatever it may be. You need more space, right? So then they move up out of there in the next come in kind of thing, right? So I find that the one bedroom has a little bit higher turnover. I figure as far as investors go, it might be a better idea to get into those one bedrooms simply for the easier access, cheaper to get into, and again, the higher turnover. Like if you have everyone moving every year, every 2 years or whatever, like as an investor, your rent will go up substantially.
Definitely.
Right? So.
Also, something else to consider. You mentioned being single and moving into a one bed. To be honest, I haven't seen many single people. Most people these days, if you're moving into a one bed, of course, there's exceptions. There's lots of people who make a solid income in Vancouver and are able to rent a one bed themselves. But I find a lot of my tenants and a lot of the people that come to the viewings are always couples, and even renting a one bed, a small one bed or a studio. And it's just the higher cost of living. Everything's more expensive these days. People need a higher income to be able to rent something by themselves. And partnering up with somebody is a good way to do it. So I've definitely seen definitely fewer single individuals renting stuff over couples.
Yeah, now statistically, West Van is the most expensive place to rent, not by price per square foot, but just by the unit. As Kimia pointed out last month, actually, she was on the show saying that generally it's bigger. There's more houses in West Van than most downtown where the higher rents are. The least expensive being Langley, but that's kind of more traditional. Like the further east you get, usually the less your rent is. I mean, there's no surprises there. But downtown Vancouver, broken down by the areas, the highest, of course, is like downtown core, and second being Kits. Now, you work a lot downtown, Peter, so have you been noticing this as far as the areas as well? Is this sort of congruent with what you've been seeing? And additionally, I've always been wondering, does Kits go up in the summer because people go to the beach?
For sure, 100%. Kits and the West End. The West End, close to the beach. Kits, obviously, right on the beach. And you for sure see that go up in the summer. Downtown in general is just, it goes up a lot in the summer. People want to be downtown, and it's, a good time to move is always in the summer.
Yeah.
At least for a lot of people. And especially when the sun shines out and the beach looks nice, why not move to somewhere where you can walk to the beach in a couple minutes? So you
sure.
definitely see those seasonal geographical increases happen.
Yeah, especially because in the more the winter times, you look at the beaches and stuff, and like it's kind of grim looking almost. It's foggy and rainy and cold and whatnot. So yeah, I guess there's like that sunshine tax. So I guess if you, as a tenant, if you want to live by Kits, move in the winter.
Honestly, yeah, I got into my current rental in October or November, I think, and I definitely got a better deal just because it was harder for them to find a tenant during that time. So I know it looks nice to move in the summer, but if you're able to, moving in the middle of winter is a good way to get a bit of a discount on the rent.
Right. So for the second month in a row, the top 5 most expensive cities in all of Canada is BC. Look at us go. So the number 1, as we just touched on, is West Van, downtown Vancouver, followed in number 3, Burnaby, number 4, North Van, and number 5, Richmond. Richmond keeps on jumping in to number 5, and another place in Markham, Ontario. I don't know what Markham is or why, but Richmond seems to keep on jumping in and out. And I mean, I don't work very much out in Richmond. Do you have any properties out there?
I have a couple older ones, but yeah. That's interesting to me, actually. I don't really have a good explanation for that. Like I said, I don't work much out in Richmond, but the couple places I do have are, in my opinion, kind of, a fair price, or they're not. I haven't seen any egregious pricing personally in Richmond.
Yeah.
But maybe there's a lot of new builds. I'm assuming there's new builds going up in Richmond. And...
I don't know. I think I'm gonna have to get somebody who works out in Richmond on the show. I'll have to start poking in the brain and see what's going on out there.
That would definitely be a good idea. Yeah.
So Vancouver's a little bit different beast in the fact that in most places when people are trying to gauge for a tenant, they want them to be spending about 30% of their income on the rent. Obviously, in Vancouver, that isn't going to fly here. Like, if we're going for that, no one can live anywhere. I find we're pushing higher, even to 40, maybe even 50 if need be. It depends. Because of the prices are so high. What do you use as far as ways to determine this yourself? Maybe not a hard and fast number, but what are some factors when you're screening a tenant to see if they're going to be a good fit?
Well, speaking about the kind of gross income percentage, that 33% or 1/3 seems like a reasonable kind of amount. But like you said, I've seen up to 40% is something that I would still definitely consider. Mm-hmm. Looking at a little bit of savings, I think, is also important. And looking to see if the person, the incoming tenant has something liquid, a little bit of checking account or savings account that they can actually use if, say, they lost their job or if there was a downturn or something like that in their industry. Depends on the industry, I guess.
Yeah.
Credit history as well, it can be important. But honestly, the other thing I love doing is talking to their current landlord. If you talk to their current landlord and the landlord has nothing but good things to say, awesome. It's usually a very, very good sign, especially if the landlord is another property manager or a realtor or something like that, where I can look them up on Google and actually say, hey, that's the person I'm actually talking to.
And not a friend. Right?
And not just a friend of the tenants. It's always nice to be able to get a good landlord reference from somebody else in the industry, because those people are also more likely to share things that they've noticed. And it's definitely important. So those kind of three things: savings, solid income, as well as a good landlord reference. Those things kind of in tandem are the best way to kind of suss out a tenant.
What are some of the questions that you ask a landlord to sort of get that? I mean, you can't just be, are they good? Like, what are a couple of the questions that you would ask a landlord to try to build a better picture here?
If it's a stratified property, I always ask if there's been any complaints, strata complaints about anything. It could be, being too loud after hours. It could be, smoking in the unit. It could be putting the cardboard in the cardboard recycling and not flattening it or something like that. Who knows? It could be anything like that. Any sort of kind of strata violation or bylaw violation is something to consider. If maybe the tenant's the nicest person in the world, but they never put the recycling in the right place and they're racking up hundreds of dollars of strata fines, it's not going to make them super popular. So it's all definitely something to consider. And as well, how often, you had to reach out to the tenant. If you have to reach out to them all the time to do something or they're not very communicative. I love being able to communicate with my tenants easily. If they're good at communicating, that's a huge bonus. And I think being able to kind of build a little bit of a landlord-tenant relationship with somebody who you can communicate with and who's easy to talk to is really important.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely part of it. It's interesting when you have people coming in to try to rent a place that it's almost like a express job interview kind of thing. Like, there's just there's certain people that you're just not going to get along with this person. You're like, do I really want to be in bed with this person for a year just banging heads? You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah. A lot of tenants, and this is some good advice for tenants, honestly. They come into the showing of the property thinking that they're looking at the place, and of course they're looking at the place to see if they like it, but at the same time I'm checking them out to see if I like them. And it is like a little mini kind of interview. And I think it's really important as tenants, and I do the same thing when I'm looking for a place for myself, is to put your best foot forward, show up on time, show up, not well dressed, but maybe not in your pajamas.
Yeah.
And, engage with the property manager or engage with the landlord to really kind of talk to them and kind of get to know each other a little bit, because honestly, that goes a long way. When I'm giving my clients kind of suggestions or my opinion on somebody, if I really liked the person, there's a higher chance that I'm going to kind of push their application to the top of the pile. Yeah. If I get 6 applications and all of the people, on paper, their jobs and stuff like that are relatively similar, or the income's not an issue, but I really liked applicant number 3. They were super nice and polite and just like a kind person. I'm definitely going to put that one to the top of the pile and tell the client, hey, this person I have a good gut feeling about.
Yeah, I mean, additional simple tip for tenants, and these are one of the ones that like always irks me. I just like bang my head sometimes, is when they will apply and not know the address. And I'm like, you're trying to spend $3,000 a month on somewhere and you don't know where you're going? Like, this is a red flag for me immediately. I realize that people are looking for multiple places and stuff, but maybe pay attention to where you're going, because that's a sign for me that someone's not all there, at least for me, at least.
For sure. No, I totally agree.
Yeah, it's kind of a pet peeve where you're like, I want the 2-bedroom one. Like, in what city, my friend? So yeah, it's interesting that, and interesting enough, like on the landlord side, lately I've been running in with a lot of landlords, I guess, as you were talking about the price of renovations and even paint. One of our painters was telling me the other day that the actual cost of their paint, like before it's on the wall, has gone up 40%. Like, that adds up, of course. I noticed that there's a lot of landlords that seem to keep on trying to get top rent without giving a top product. And I think that this really needs to be drilled in to the landlords. Like, you guys need to make sure that you're bringing the A game. Have you been running into this lately more with any of your landlords as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think paint is one of the number one things. Mm-hmm. Painting and making sure you don't fall super far behind on the appliances.
Yeah.
If you're renting out a place and maybe you'd have the floors done or something like that, the place looks good, but the appliances are just super, super old. It might be time to upgrade them. Maybe you can do it one at a time or slowly over the course of a period of a couple of years. But it's definitely a good idea. And like you said, painting is one of those number one things. If the tenant walks in and there's screw holes all over the wall and it's dirt, the walls are all dirty from, stains and stuff like that, it's time to paint the unit.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be super expensive. You don't have to use the most high quality paint in the world.
Yeah.
Just use something that's durable, something that maybe will last, and try and use an off-white color is the one thing that I would recommend.
Yeah, neutral. Keep it neutral.
No feature walls in rentals, please.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing too as well is with the paint upgrades that you're doing, like, you can just do color on color. Like, it's not necessary to go and do the double coats and all that. Like, if you've got an off-white wall, just take the same off-white paint, or hell, just take an actual white paint. It doesn't matter if it shows through. It'll kind of all blend in together, and you'll be fine on that. It'll save you bucks because you can get a professional painter to come in there, lay a single coat of paint down, call it a day. And the amount of return that you're going to get on that for having fresh walls, because the place looks brand new, it will pay back very quickly.
Definitely agree. It looks nicer in the photos. It looks nicer in the video tour.
Yeah.
And it looks much better when you're doing the showings.
Yeah. In addition to the RTB generally says about 5 years for paint. So if somebody if you haven't painted your place in 5 years and then you go and try to get after a tenant for scuffing up the walls excessively,
or nail holes, it's just not going to work. The RTB will let you know that the walls have outlived their useful life.
Yeah, exactly, right? So, and along with that, because we're talking about some of the new builds, what I have found later on is the carpets. And a lot of the new builds come with carpet. And of course, developers are using the cheapest end of the roll, no longer being made carpet, and they do wear through. And when they do start to wear through, they look perpetually dirty. It doesn't matter how many times you clean these carpets, they're done. This is something that owners need to take into account, that, like, especially in the high traffic areas, like the route going from the kitchen into the living room is going to get mashed. And the amount of times that we've had these conversations with landlords about, oh, you need to change your carpets. Like, no, they're fine. Like, no, they're 10 years old and they've had, 4 tenants in it. And, it's time. They do have a life expectancy as well.
Totally agree on the carpet thing. Carpet in the bedroom can be okay because it's not as, super high traffic. But even so, in general, carpet is just, it shows the wear and tear so much more easily. And it's really tough to, at the end of a tenancy, if the carpet looked horrible going in and it looks horrible coming out, it's tough to say, oh, tenant, you didn't clean the carpet.
Yeah.
That carpet is uncleanable at this point and needs to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And just touching back on the appliances, it's a good idea. If you're going to do your appliances one by one, I would strongly suggest to always do the dishwasher first, just because it's the threat. Like, the floods come from dishwashers and clothes washer dryer. Mm-hmm. So I'd say if you're going to go ahead and do your appliances one by one, always start off with the dishwasher first, if you're in the kitchen, of course, because that way you've also reduced the threat of a possible flood, which will cost you a lot more than a dishwasher would have.
Avoiding floods is always good advice, so yeah. I totally agree with you there.
Exactly, right? Now, interesting enough, I guess kind of tying a little bit into the carpets and that is there's always the debate about pets in Vancouver and rentals, and people generally are scared to have pets in their place, and it seems kind of nuts. I did a quick search today before we came in and did the show here, not to put a date on it, but here we are. But on Craigslist, there is $59.84 for rental postings. That's just 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, it doesn't matter, just rental postings. If you add pets to the search, it drops it to $17.19, which is an astronomical drop in the amount of units. It does also raise the price up a little bit because you have a smaller, supply versus demand. So if you're an investor, probably your best bet is to allow for pets and to buy a 1 bedroom. That's pretty much the way to go.
Good advice. Just on the pets thing, just quickly, I saw, or I was renting out a 1 bedroom place. Speaking of the 1 bedroom, renting out a 1 bedroom place in East Van, nice place. And we set the price relatively high. I think we set it at $2,750, okay. And it was a little bit of a bigger 1 bedroom with some nice renovations, but still on the higher side. And the owner was open to pets. And I noticed when I did the first round of showings, I showed 7 different prospective tenants, and 6 of them had pets. So I just thought about it. If we weren't allowing pets in the unit, I would have only had 1 single showing at that price range. So, and we ended up choosing a tenant with a pet, and they're going to move in soon, and that's great. And the owner's very happy about that, and they got pretty good, very high rent. Plus, the tenant was able to find a place that would accommodate their pet. So it's a bit of a win-win. I will say that probably 80 or 85% of my rentals that I rent out are no pets. And I'd like to see that change a little bit because it does open up the renter pool to a large amount of people who are willing to pay a little bit more.
Oh, well, exactly. And what I've also found, I guess, because the pool is smaller, once somebody moves into somewhere with a pet, they generally don't move for quite some time. And I think it's because it's so difficult to find one. So once you get settled in and you found a winner, then they just stay there, keep their nose clean, take care of the joint, right? Because they don't want to have to move or, piss off the strata and get told to move.
Totally agree.
Excellent. Well, I think we're running out of time here because I'm out of coffee. Do you have anything to add out there? Anything that's on your mind there, Peter?
You know what? I honestly think we touched on a pretty good range of topics. I love coming by and talking to you about the rental market, and love to come back again.
Wicked, man. We'll definitely have you back on there. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. If you've got this far, thank you extra. If you found anything useful in this podcast, please remember to subscribe. We'll be back in 2 weeks with more on investment and property management. My name's Haze Hartwig, and this has been Bamboo, Vancouver's property management and realty investment podcast.